Here's a couple of fun examples of self-serving attribution. So one study looked at year-end um, letters to shareholders and written by CEOs, and they found that they claimed credit for 83% of all the positive events that happened that year, but only reported having blame for 19% of all of the negative events that happened that year. This is a really fun one. Reports to insurance companies. This first one is: a telephone pole was approaching. I was attempting to swerve out of its way when it struck my car. And then another description of another accident: a pedestrian hit me and went under my car. So this frame tells us to take these examples with a grain of salt, because there probably was some motivation behind that, self-protective motivations. So we rely more heavily on the actual research that has been done on self-serving attributions. Okay, the fundamental attribution error. I said that's at the heart of this, not only of this chapter, but of social psychology. And here we have it defined again: the failure to recognize the importance of situational influences on behavior and the corresponding tendency to overemphasize the importance of dispositions on behavior. So if you recall, dispositions include such factors as your personality, characteristics, whether you're a good person or a bad person kind of thing, also abilities. And for instance, inferences may be made about somebody's personality, even though we're aware that their behavior actually was a result of having an assigned role. And if you think about some of the studies that you looked at in Philip Zimbardo's The Power of the Situation, this really applies to those studies. Their behavior may have been quite different if they did not have an assigned role. There have been a number of studies on the fundamental attribution error, and we're going to be talking about one of the earliest studies done at Duke University in 1967. Jones and Harris had participants read an essay about Fidel Castro's communist regime in Cuba. And during that era, 1967, in the US, that was a really unpopular regime. Half of the participants read a pro-Castro essay and half read an anti-Castro essay, supposedly written in response to a directive to write a short essay either defending or criticizing Castro. Afterward, the participants rated the essayist's general attitude towards Castro's Cuba. Those who read a pro-Castro essay rated the writer's attitude as being much more favorable toward communist Cuba and Castro than those who read the anti-Castro essay. And you can look at the left side. These two bars illustrate that. The interesting thing about this study, though, is that then they took a group and they actually told them before they listened to these essays in the format of a debate, they were told that the stances were assigned. So you weren't necessarily pro-Castro if you were writing a pro-Castro essay, and you weren't necessarily against him if you wrote an anti-Castro essay. And so the participants did listen to the essays, and then they were asked again to, as a different group, to rate how aligned they thought the stances were with the reader's actual beliefs. And you can see that they still, it was less so, but they still, even with the knowledge that the information didn't really reflect the person's attitudes, about Castro that they still tended to associate their stance with their true beliefs and attitudes. It's easy to fall prey to the fundamental attribution error when we're trying to explain the causal attributions of people who are advantaged and people who are disadvantaged. So we tend to give people credit if they're doing well, but blame them if they are not doing so well. And here's a really good example taken from your book. They talk in this article about Hurricane Katrina and how so many people actually judged people that stayed and decided not to leave before the hurricane, and kind of blamed them for their own demise because they chose to stay. The problem behind that is that they might not have had so much choice in the matter. So people that tended to stay behind were the underprivileged, people that didn't have the resources, the means to actually leave. Most of them didn't have a vehicle to leave or the money to leave, so they stuck it out. So what are some of the causes of the fundamental attribution error? Oh, here's a really interesting one, and this relates to actually, if you're familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy and Ellis's kind of list of irrational thoughts, one of his irrational thoughts that he's identified is belief in a just world. And we are motivated to believe in a just world. The just world hypothesis is the belief that people get what they deserve in life and they deserve what they get, kind of like karma, what goes around comes around. And along with that comes the idea that good things should happen to good people and bad things should happen to bad people. Is that the truth? We know that many times bad things, even catastrophes, can happen to good people, and that many times, this is even seems more unfortunate, really good things can happen to people that do really bad things. So this type of belief in a just world makes us feel better because we feel less vulnerable if we are going to be good people. We're not as susceptible to bad things happening to us, we believe, if we act in a good manner. This kind of thinking really justifies the blame the victim stance. For instance, blaming a woman for being vulnerable to rape because of the time of night that she's out, or the fact that she was drinking alcohol, or because of the clothes that she was wearing, or in domestic violence cases, blaming the victim for not leaving. Perceptual salience also explains the root of fundamental attribution error. So we're going to be talking about this next chart here. So this is the work of Dan Gilbert, and back in 2015 came up with this model to explain how we attribute causation. So in theory, what we ought to do, that's represented by A here, this area up on top of the chart here. In theory, we should use both behavior and context, or the situation, to interpret the significance or the meaning behind a behavior. And that should give us our causal explanation, a combination of the person and the situation. In actuality, what Dan Gilbert found is that we make initial dispositional inferences and then have difficulty later adjusting them on the basis of situational information. So we tend to default to discounting the context or the situation and looking just at the behavior, identifying it, zooming in on it, and we make kind of an automatic judgment or characterization of the person. There might be some consideration for what the situation or context is here, but we tend not to really pay that much attention to it. We have a hard time doing that once we have assigned a causal explanation that is more characteristic and less situational. The actor-observer difference is also a factor. So the actor-observer difference is a difference in attribution based on who's making the assessment. Is it the actor, who's relatively inclined towards explaining things according to the situation, or is it the observer, who is relatively inclined to make a dispositional attribution? So this, really does relate to what we talked about with self-serving attributions. One of the reasons for this is that actors and observers differ in the amount of and the kind of information that they have about behavior. So if I'm explaining my own behavior, I have knowledge of all of the situational factors that are involved, whereas you as an observer may not understand the context of my behavior. This focus on memory and imagination taken from your book is a good example that explains the difference between actors and observers when they make judgments. And I encourage you to go ahead and kind of freeze the video so you can read through this and understand it if you haven't already read it in your textbook. But basically, it's about a study by Frank and Gilovich in 1989 where they had people recall an episode from the past and under different conditions. One group in the study reported episodes from the past from a first-person perspective. So they reported it, they were more likely to report it from the standpoint of being in the context or the situation. And then the second group reported past experience from a third-person perspective. So they're asked to kind of stand outside themselves and observe their own behavior and report about it. So the accounts from the first-person perspective tended to rely much more heavily on situational explanations and the context, whereas the third-person perspective group, the attributions tended to be much more likely to be from a standpoint of dispositions or kind of having an outside view. So that's even when they're judging themselves, they tend to judge more according to the character and dispositions than when they're judging themselves in the first person. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, I think I'm going to quit there because we just got a couple more minutes left and we'll pick up the last lecture looking at cultural differences and maybe a little bit of priming.